Hey there, Daily Gardeners. There is no episode tomorrow. My son John has the day off from school, so I'm going to play hooky with him and enjoy a nice 3-day weekend. Plus, Maple Grove is in the state tournament, so go Maple Grove. They've never won the state football tournament before, but things are looking up, so keep your fingers crossed. And although there will not be an episode tomorrow, there will be a newsletter. And if you're not signed up for that yet, all you have to do is look in today's show notes. There's a link to it there, or you can head on over to the website at thedailygardener.org. You can sign up for the newsletter there. But I would say make sure you do so today so that you can be sure to get tomorrow's edition. Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is December 1st, the first day of December, and there are 20 days until the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. And then we turn the corner and head toward spring, which is fantastic news and reminds me of that old proverb, no matter how long the winter, spring is sure to follow. So true. And here are a few other pieces of folklore for the month of December. This one says, December changeable and mild, then the whole winter will remain a child. So cross your fingers for a mild December. Then this one says, thunder in December foretells fine weather. So keep your ears peeled for thunder. And here's one about the shortest day. It says, frost on the shortest day is said to indicate a severe winter. So we'll have to pay attention to the 21st and see if we have frost on that day. Well, meanwhile, over on social media, on Twitter and on Mastodon, the word of the day for the very short story is the word ego. And so in keeping with the word ego, I actually wrote 2 quick little short stories. I'm wondering if anybody picked up on that. But here's the first one, and I thought you'd get a kick out of it. This is actually a little story about an experience I had probably about 5 or 6 years ago. Anyway, I wrote, Cantwell said that gardeners dream bigger dreams than emperors, and that is true. There's a lot of ego in gardens. I once went to a fairy garden workshop with a friend who is a therapist. We saw a garden that had a fairy in the middle of a stream, and I thought that was kind of odd placement. So I moved the fairy to the riverbank. And this made my friend laugh. She said, that fairy is a self-object, and the gardener that put her there in the middle of that stream cannot make a decision. And until she does, she'll put that fairy back in the middle of the river because it won't seem right to put her on one side of the river or the other. And so then I ended with this little hashtag, Gardens are the gardener. In other words, our gardens are a reflection of us and what's going on in our lives, what we like, what we enjoy. And definitely there's a lot of ego in our gardens. And then the other short story that I shared was kind of a spoof on the Newlywed Game. If you remember that game show that was on TV with Bob Eubanks, I always loved watching that when I was a little girl. Well, anyway, I did a little spoof on that with the word ego, and I was trying somehow to tie it to the rose because I thought roses, maybe along with dahlias, are the flower that have the biggest ego in the garden. So I just thought I would connect the two. And the way that I did that is I came up with this little imaginary scenario on the Newlywed Game. So we'll start out with what Bob Eubanks would say. Name a flower that reminds you of your partner. And then the spouse says, I'm going to say the rose, Bob. Roses say, look at me. Look at me. Look at me. Look at me. But don't touch. Sounds familiar. So I'm going to say the rose. So that was my other little story about ego today. I amuse myself. Well, the other topic that I wanted to chat about today is pass-along plants. It is the season of giving, and what better gift to give than a pass-along plant? Pass-along plants do not have to be complicated. Think about items like begonias or Christmas cactus or spider plant or coleus. If you've managed to keep some coleus going through the winter just by taking some cuttings, you can do that again. You can take more cuttings and then pass that coleus on to another gardener. And this actually is a wonderful Christmas activity to do with your kids. If your kids are not into gardening, or maybe your grandkids, this is a way that you can draw them over to your houseplants and then have a few fun things set out for them, like a little tiny clippers that they can hold in their hands and use with some of the plants. A lot of these indoor tools are really child-sized when you look at them. And kids are really drawn to them. I don't know if you've ever seen that it's like a little white tote and it's got some green piping and it's full of all these little garden tools. I run into it at Goodwill every now and then, and it seems to be ubiquitous. Everybody's got it or had it or knows somebody that has one. But anyway, that tote is just chock full of these little handy implements that you can use when you're working on your houseplants or in your conservatory. And I remember when my Johnny was little or when Emma was little, they loved pulling out all those little tools. I hardly used more than one or two of them, but the kids loved to drag them all out and then just play with them. So there's a tweezer and there's a little rake and there's all kinds of fun stuff in there. And so I think one of the ways that you just get kids working on houseplants is letting them play, letting them experience all of those different things. What would you use a rake for with a houseplant? What would you use a tweezers for? My favorite thing to do with tweezers is after I bring in my houseplants from the cabin, they are usually littered with pine needles. And pine needles are not very fun to take out of houseplants. They just find their way into every nook and cranny. But if you want to make that activity infinitely more interesting and actually kind of therapeutic, use one of those bamboo tweezers. That's a fun way to pull out little pine needles that have slipped in the leaves and the little grooves of your houseplants, not to mention the soil. So that's what I use the tweezers for a lot. And then for the rake, if you add a lot of perlite to your potting soil, which I do, then that perlite actually makes the soil light and fluffy, and it's very, very easy to rake. And you can actually even just kind of set up your own sensory tray full of potting soil and let the kids play with those tools and rake the soil and make little paths, almost like a Zen garden. They can have all kinds of fun with that. But think about pass-along plants. This is the perfect time of year to pot up some pass-along plants. You could even work with the kids on potting up some amaryllis. Get some big bulbs. Show the kids just how huge that amaryllis bulb is, and they will watch it and wait for it to bloom. And they just won't hardly believe their eyes at the color and the size and the crazy tropical leaves that come out of that thing. So tons of good stuff, good ideas, and different activities that you can do with kids or even just with a garden friend. You could collaborate on it. Everybody bring a couple houseplants and then pass them along to each other. So there you go. A few ideas on pass-along plants on this first day of December. All right, let's get to today's garden history. All right, we start out today's garden history with an event that happened on this day in 1597. The Herbal was published, and it was written by the English herbalist John Gerard. Today, the book is considered mostly a plagiarism of Rembert Doden's Herbal that was published 40 years earlier. But John's book is still beautiful. He shared over 800 species of plants, and he also had these incredibly gorgeous woodcut illustrations. And his descriptions of the plants were pretty straightforward. They were simple and informative. For instance, in his description of self-heal or brownwort, Prunella vulgaris, he wrote, There is not a better wound herb to be found, and I think herbalists today would likely still agree with him. And in other instances, John's descriptions offer a glimpse into life in the 17th century. Regarding borage blossoms, which John called boragewort, he wrote, "Those of our time use the flowers in salads to exhilarate and to make the mind glad." They were a little bit of a mood lifter. Well, during his life, John was allowed to garden on land at Somerset House, and for a time he served as herbalist to King James. And in 1578, John was the first person to record and describe the beautiful snake's head fritillary with the Latin name Fritillaria meleagris. The snake's head fritillary is thought to be native to parts of Britain, but not Scotland. They do not have that growing naturally there. But today, John Gerard is remembered in the botanical genus Gerardia, kind of a fun one to say, and easy to remember back to John Gerard. You know, another little heads up about John Gerard when it comes to Christmas shopping is that the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust actually sells a number of items that feature John Gerard's woodcuts. So they have little cards that feature holly and pears and mistletoe, holiday-related flora. And so that's something fun that you can check out. I mentioned this on the show back in 2020, and I just went over there today, this morning, and I'm glad to see that they still sell it. And this is a really great organization. The Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, as you might imagine, cares for Shakespeare's family homes. And they also share the love of Shakespeare from his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. Anyway, if you'd like to support a great organization and enjoy the John Gerard Christmas cards and gift wrap and other items, just head on over to shop.shakespeare.org.uk. I'll put a link to it in today's show notes, make it easy for you. All right, and today we also celebrate the birthday of Sereno Watson. Love that name, Sereno. He was an American botanist and curator of the Gray Herbarium at Harvard University in Boston, and he was born on this day, December 1st, in 1826. Sereno is remembered for succeeding Asa Gray at the herbarium and for continuing much of his work from 1873 until his death. A great master of botany in the American West, that was his specialty, Sereno also wrote a book called Botany of California. Now, if you were a botany student today and you were studying Sereno, you would probably remember what he looked like because he has this very impressive long beard. So I always chuckle when I see that. But Sereno was greatly admired. He was respected by his peers. He had a great attention to detail, a skill that botanists definitely need. And there's one instance of this that I always use to illustrate this point. In 1871, Sereno named a new plant genus Hesperochiron, and this was for two little wildflowers that were only found in the western part of the United States. Hespero means west, and Chiron is actually a nod to a centaur who was the first herbalist who taught humanity about the healing powers of plants. So when Sereno named this genus, he was combining those two words together very cleverly. And he was also sticking his neck out a little bit. He was rejecting the classification of these plants as members of the snapdragon family. Another botanist had put them there, and Sereno had dissected the plants and was convinced that they belonged with the gentians. And so it is this type of due diligence and careful study that made Sereno Watson such a great botanist. Today, Sereno is remembered with a very cool plant, the saw palm, or the Serenoa repens palm. Now, this is a relatively small palm tree, as palm trees go. It only grows to be about 8 to 10 feet tall, and it is the only species in the genus Sereno, which is also another little fun fact and a cool way to honor a great botanist like Sereno Watson. And speaking of great botanists, today we celebrate Ellsworth Hill. We wish him a happy heavenly birthday. He was a Presbyterian minister, writer, and American botanist, and he was born on this day in 1833, just 7 years younger than Sereno Watson. But I love Ellsworth's personal story. When he was only 20 years old, one of his knees stopped working. A doctor attempted to help him figure out a way to make a living with such a disability, and he suggested that Ellsworth study botany. So Ellsworth decided to pursue that suggestion, and he would crawl from his house to the orchard outside, where he would pick a few flowers and then crawl back to the house and then work to identify them. The following year, Ellsworth was using canes to walk, and he then moved to Mississippi, where the climate was warmer. After Ellsworth met and married a young woman named Melancy Leach, she became his daily helpmate. And when Ellsworth felt especially lame or lacked strength, it was Melancy who would step in and then finish the work for him. But when Ellsworth was 40, he somehow put his lameness behind him. In the back half of his life, he seemed to be able to better manage his physical challenges and cope with the symptoms. Reminds me a little bit about arthritis, that sometimes after the joints have deteriorated so much, the pain actually just goes away. I don't know if that's what Ellsworth had, but in any case, his pain was considerably less as he grew older. But I found this very touching tribute to Ellsworth after he died. It was from the great botanist and grass expert Agnes Chase, one of the few great female botanists of this era. And Agnes wrote these words about Ellsworth. And she starts out by talking about specimens that Ellsworth had gone out into the field and collected. Ellsworth told me that he carried his vasculum over his shoulder, that's a little container for plants, and a camp stool with his crutch or cane in one hand. To secure a plant, he would drop the camp stool, which opened of itself, and then he would lower himself onto the stool and dig the plant, and then put it in his vasculum. And I love what she wrote next. She's talking about his incredible drive and determination. She writes, Ellsworth recovered from his lameness, but often suffered acute pain from cold or wetness or overexertion. But this did not deter him from making botanical trips that would have taxed a more robust man. In the dunes, I have seen him tire out more than one able-bodied man. A great tribute to Ellsworth Hill. Well, there's one other personality trait about Ellsworth that I truly admire, and that is that he recognized the value in revisiting places that had been previously botanized. You know, I hear this all the time from gardeners. There are no new plants to be discovered. There's no way I would ever find a new plant out in these woods or in my garden. But Ellsworth would probably be the first person to disagree with that. And he actually wrote about it once. He said, in studying the flora of a restricted region, no matter how carefully it seems to have been explored, one is frequently surprised by new things. No region can be regarded as thoroughly explored until every acre of its wild areas has been examined. Some plants are so rare or local or grow under such peculiar conditions that a few square rods or even feet may comprise their range. A little something to contemplate there, courtesy of Ellsworth Hill. And we close out this segment today with birthday greetings for Bette Midler, the American singer, songwriter, actress, comedian, and film producer. She was born on this day, December 1st, in 1945. Bette was born in Honolulu, little known fact, and in 1979, Bette starred in her first movie. It was called The Rose. I remember watching that with my mom. I thought it was fantastic. And of course, I practiced that song on my piano, kind of an iconic 70s experience. And yet, surprisingly, Bette did not win an Academy Award for her performance in The Rose. That year, the award went to Sally Field for Norma Ray. But 40 years later, in 2019, Bette was honored by the New York Botanical Garden. I think that's infinitely better anyway. And they announced that they had named a rose in honor of Bette's character in The Rose, the Divine Miss M. And so on June 19th, 2019, the New York Botanical Garden introduced Bette's White Yellow Rose with a fragrance of mint and lime. That's the Divine Miss M Rose. And it was unveiled at the New York Restoration Project Spring Picnic, which was hosted at the Botanical Garden in New York City. After receiving the honor, Bette commented very humorously, "I didn't win the Oscar for The Rose. Of course, I never think about it. But I do want to say right now, there's no Norma Ray Rose." So she got the last laugh. Well, in 1995, Bette started the New York Restoration Project, which is a nonprofit that renovates and restores neglected New York City parks. It's a great organization if you're looking for a charity, and their mission is to ensure green space for all New Yorkers. Well, by the end of the event, the unveiling of Bette's Rose, she led the crowd there in a sing-along. And so she sang Lynn Anderson's Rose Garden. She also sang The Rose. And then she ended with Everything's Coming Up Roses. That would have been an amazing event to be at. What a wonderful moment in modern history. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Punk Ikebana by Louesa Roebuck. This book came out in 2022. It's hot off the press. I think it was just released last month on November 8th. And the subtitle is Reimagining the Art of Floral Design. Now, this is the second book that Louesa has written. I reviewed her other book back in 2020, which was Foraged Flora. And in that case, she was foraging for flowers to arrange. And so Louesa is always thinking very creatively about flower arranging. And so to me, this book is the natural next step for her. In fact, the great American naturalist, writer, and illustrator, Obie Kaufman, wrote the foreword for this book, and he is clearly a huge fan of Louesa's. And by the way, I love how she spells her name. She spells it Lou for Lou, and then ESA, Louesa. So just a little quirk there if you're trying to search for her. But anyway, Obie wrote this about Louesa's newest book, Punk Ikebana. He writes, "I will gush." When asked by Louesa to write the foreword to this dangerous and monumentally beautiful book, I howled a perfectly contradictory mix of terror and delight. I've been bewitched by the magic that is Louesa and her art for years. I like how he writes. And I identified her long ago as the very best kind of revolutionary, and the effect is effortless aesthetic alchemy in which the silent is transformed into the loud, the ugly is made to be beautiful, and the empty is found to be surprisingly full. So we're getting into a little Zen here, a little woo-woo, but that's all right. And by the way, don't let this whole punk term throw you off, or the term Ikebana, because Ikebana is just simply the art of Japanese flower arrangement. And flower arrangement is nothing to be scared of. And people have been calling Louesa's work punk for over a decade. And so she has just fully embraced that term. And she writes this in the introduction. When I'm asked what punk Ikebana means to me, my gut response is I'm not completely sure yet. I do recall friends and colleagues casually referring to my work as punk Ikebana as far back as 2008. So this is well over a decade. And they perhaps saw something new and iconoclastic in my work before I did. And so this is where Louesa shares some of her thoughts, her musings on some of the key precepts that go into Ikebana. And so she talks about things like silence, minimalism, harmonious form and line, names, humanity, and composing in situ. And so this is what she writes about silence. In Ikebana, this refers to a quiet appreciation of nature, free of noise or idle talk. But then Louesa flips it on its head because she says, hey, I like to gossip when I'm working on plants. I'm not above having a conversation with a fellow designer or a fellow floral lover as I'm working on my creations. She also talks about minimalism, and she says, this is where my punk aesthetic comes in. I'm a bit of a rebel and a maximalist more often than not. She says that she does strive for balance and harmony, but she always loves glam. She likes sexy. She likes big and bold. Then when it comes to harmonious form and line, this is where Louesa is talking about sourcing locally. And this is something that I remember she talked about in her foraged book as well. She writes, when you gather and glean seasonal and local flora and then compose naturally, you'll find that harmony comes effortlessly. So if you're pulling together things from around your area, from around your home, in your woods, the native plants in your garden, you'll see that these elements work very well together because they live together naturally in nature. One traditional precept of Ikebana is to know the names of the flora that you use, because naming is a form of respect. She says, I often speak of flora in inconsistent terms because that's how I've come to know them. Sometimes the common name rolls more easily off the tongue under the names by which I have come to love them and encourage you to call them what makes sense to you, but always with respect. And then another aspect that Louesa talks about when it comes to Ikebana is composing in situ. And here, of course, this is a reference to the original place. That's what in situ means. And here Louesa writes that when you bring your floral pieces into your homes, the dialogue with place continues. Each time I compose, I'm in dialogue with the room or with whatever space I'm in. I'm in dialogue with the color story, the textiles, the vessel, the totems, the books, the art, the furniture even. The arrangement does not exist in a vacuum. It lives, breathes, and communicates with space as a whole. And this is in keeping with the idea of animism, that each object, whether it's a stone, a feather, a vessel, has a life force. And I do identify with this because have you ever gotten a floral arrangement and you want it for a certain room and then you put it in that room and you're like, no, it's not working here. Then you trot it over to another room and no, it's not working there either. And so you have to hunt for the right spot, whether that is a clash in design principles or a clash in this life force that Louisa's talking about. Ikebana is acknowledging that. And so that is a principle just like feng shui. Louesa says that every time she engages in this medium of floral arranging, she hopes to learn, not to teach or instruct. Louesa points out, teaching is just a byproduct of learning. They're one and the same. Well, you can tell by some of the things that I've been reading to you today that Louesa is on a whole nother level of understanding and emotional connection and head and heart connection to this topic. She's really a unique figure when it comes to flowers and flower arranging and flower art in our modern times. And by the way, the cover of this book is just so stunning. It's very glamorous, very sophisticated. You can see why so many people are fans of her work. This book is 256 pages of The Way of Flowers, Ikebana, and the rules you need to master in order to bend them and make your own punk Ikebana wonders and enjoy them in your home. You can get a copy of the fresh off the press Punk Ikebana by Louesa and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $40. Incredible book. Well, I am so excited to share today's Botanic Spark with you. I remember when I found this little tidbit and I filed it away. It must have been a little bit later in December, and I've had to wait a whole year to share it with you. So I'm doing so today. But it was on this day, December 1st, back in 1955, that Rosa Parks was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama, after a bus driver ordered her to give up her bus seat to another passenger, and she refused. That Thursday had actually started out pretty uneventfully for Rosa. She was a seamstress for a department store, and in her bag on that fateful day was a yellow floral Sunday dress that she was sewing for her mom. Rosa had learned to sew from the women in her family. Both her mother and grandmother sewed. Her grandmother made quilts. But Rosa had gone on to attend the Montgomery Industrial School for Girls. She subsidized her income as a tailor's assistant and a seamstress with sewing work from private clients and friends and family members. But Rosa's yellow dress that she was working on this day, over 70 years ago, was a wrap dress, my favorite kind of dress. It had a small shawl collar and a V-neck made of fabric featuring brown and yellow flowers and leaves. The flared skirt had 6 gores, 3 pleats, and full-length sleeves. And the dress also had a fabric belt, so she even made the belt. And today, that floral dress, that yellow floral Sunday dress, is on display. It's at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I hope to see that dress the next time I'm in Washington, D.C. I love those little floral connections to history. So if you ever run across something, please send it my way, and I'll squirrel it away for a future episode. Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to The Daily Gardener. And don't forget about pass-along plants. It is a great time of year as the holidays get going to start working on that. Get with the kids, get with the grandkids or the neighbor kids and do a little propagating. It is so fun, easy, and rewarding. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of the Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. I'm amusing myself here. Well, in any case, and Max is now leaving the office. Well, the other topic that I wanted to share today, the other topic I wanted to chat about today in garden history. Oh no, we don't want to do that right now. We want to stop and then keep recording. Okay, one moment. Gerardia, the saw palmetto. the saw palmetto, or the Sereno repens. I think it's repens. One moment. Repens.
Onanis repens.
No, not repens. Repens. Very cool name. And it's actually... All right, and then we end this segment today by celebrating the birthday of Bette Midler, the American singer-songer. She's a sing-songer. I'm going to take a drink of this here. Hang on. Courtesy of Ellsworth Jerome Hill. Oh, and now there's Max barking. Oh, really? The fates are conspiring. Oh, you know what? It's probably lunch. Lunch is getting delivered. Okay, podcasters have to eat too. One moment. I'll come back to this. Okay, here we go.
Ikebana.
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 Ikebana. Now I'm going to say it. You repeat after me. Ikebana.
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 It's time to, well, you know what? I need to see. What else did Louesa Roebuck write? One moment. By Louesa Roebuck. Roebuck. By Louesa Roebuck. Punk Ikebana by Louesa Roebuck is to know the names of the... Oh, and here's the phone. It just never ends. It never, ever. I'm going to just pause this.